algorithms in their spam detection things to determine what is spam and what isn't. And typically what happens is when I send an email to a Microsoft server and it disappears, you've got no indication that it wasn't delivered, and unless you've got some other communication mechanism with the person you're talking to, they don't know they were meant to get it. It just vanishes. If you're lucky enough that you get some kind of error at SMTP conversation time, what you do is first you create an Outlook.com address so that you can report the bug. Then you tell the Microsoft support engineers, hey, my email's not being delivered, and here is the log to show. And they report back saying, there's nothing wrong with your system, emails should be being delivered. And that takes about 8 to 10 hours because all of their engineers are in the US and we're here. So you email them back in response to that bug saying, but look at these reports, and then you analyze the email reports for them. And then about 8 to 10 hours later, you get another email back saying, we have implemented mitigation for your server. It should be okay within 48 hours. This is not acceptable. And because it requires the postmaster on the sending system to notice that there's a problem and fix it, if you've got a Microsoft account, you don't know that emails aren't being delivered to you. So there's that, but there's also who chooses which emails you send. There have been a number of problems in the news recently that caused these email senders to be blocked. One big one was last August when a misconfigured DNS entry meant that 2/3 of the Hotmail mail sending out would be marked as spam and dropped before being delivered by everybody else in the world who was obeying the standards. If you've got a Proton Mail account, some bad actors tried to send a bomb threat via it, and the Indian subcontinent blocked Proton Mail. So if you've got one of these free accounts, everybody else in the world's got one too, and one bad actor there can cause all of the emails from there to be blocked. I'll also notice that both Microsoft and Gmail and some others are listed a number of DNS blacklists from time to time. They tend to get removed fairly quickly, but they're still there, which delays your email. If you're just a small email server, and you're actually reasonably sensible about sanitizing what you send, it's much less likely that you're going to get blocked. So, run your own email server. Make your own mistakes with the DNS to block your outgoing email. At least then you've got a chance of fixing it and understanding what went wrong so you don't make the mistake again next time. You've also got freedom of choice. You can use your own domain name. You can create whatever email addresses you want, and you can have thousands of them. It's also a lot cheaper. You've got more guarantee of privacy with a few caveats. If you're sending email to somebody, then of course they can read it. If you're sending it via a server, the postmaster on that server can probably read your email. Most of the time they won't bother because email mostly is boring. You know, it's telling people about your aunt's cat's got scabies or something. It's not interesting. And you do get enough logging that you can fix the things. It's also a lot cheaper. If you've got large mailboxes, and my daughter's one is like almost a terabyte now, it's much cheaper to have a NAS sitting in your in your home somewhere than to pay Google for huge mailboxes. Of course, if they were paying for it, maybe they wouldn't have terabyte mailboxes. I don't know. So what we want is that legitimate email generated from our address gets delivered. And we want to see legitimate email sent to us delivered. And if mail is spam on the way in, we want to detect that as early as possible and drop it. Because it's expensive to run the full Bayesian calculator using Spam Assassin on email. It just takes a long time. And we also want to make it harder for spammers to spoof our domain. Back when I was running the Gelato at UNSW site, some spammers got hold of our address and started sending mail as us. And I was getting tens of thousands of bounce messages to Postmaster, even though none of them email had ever gone through our system. So you want to be able to detect bad bounces and throw them away too. So this is a typical example of what we've got. Inside your home system, you've got a local area network, which is probably NATed. It might have IPv6, who knows. It's provided by you've got an address on that, a single IPv4 address provided by your ISP. Some ISPs use carrier-grade NAT. If they're doing that, then you can't use this type of system that I'm going to be talking about, unless they also provide IPv6, which will not be NATed, and you can use that instead. All of the hosts within your LAN, I'm going to call them the relay from hosts. The IP address is there. You want to be able to send email, no matter what. Any email that comes in that's to your domains, you want to be able to accept and deal with. Everything else you want to drop on the floor. There's a few terms here. MTA, a mail transfer agent. That's the box that's got, that's the software that runs on the mail exchanger box that transfers mail from one place to another. There's also a mail user agent and a local delivery agent, which I'll come to later. So what do you need? Well, you need a server that's up most of the time that has an A record. It doesn't need to be a static IP or anything, it just needs to be an A record. And you need port 25 open to the world so you can send email. And you want to run a suitable mail transfer agent on that server. You can just do apt install xim4, reconfigure it to say, yes, we're going to send and receive email, and then restart the server, and you're done. That gives you sending and receiving email, and you can use MUT or MailX or whatever that can look at a local mailbox on that machine to read and send mail. And it gives you a little bit of spam protection. Out-of-the-box configuration from Debian is pretty good. They've implemented a lot of spam protection just within that normal configuration. But it can be beefed up. And it also gives you lots of attacks from spammers. And nowadays, it's only really internal mail that works for that. 30 years ago, this just worked. What changed? Spammers. What spammers did is if anybody can run an email server, all the spammers did. So they would start generating emails from their local machines wherever they happen to be. The first response was for public-minded people to set up DNS blacklists. This is a place where you can look up the IP address, and if it's from a known spammer, you can just drop the email, just drop the connection as soon as you find it. Or you can just add it to your firewall rule if you want to. That stopped the main spammers, but then what they did was they started using open relays. At the time, back in the 90s, when internet was all new and shiny, lots of companies and universities ran mail servers that anybody could connect to and relay email to anywhere. This was useful because a lot of people only had dial-up connections at 300 baud, and they'd just connect when they needed to, send the email, then disconnect again. But if anybody can do it, then the spammers can do it too. The response was yet another DNS blacklist to mark open relays, and for most of the people who were running open relays, to shut them down. The next thing that happened was the spammers started generating viruses and worms and things like that that would infect Windows boxes and anything else that was running on the systems, well, DOS boxes back in those days, and cause them to generate spam. So the next DNS blacklist that came along was the ones for all the dynamic IP ranges for all those dial-up people. And so now nobody in the world accepts emails from dynamic IP addresses, which are most of the ones in the world. And the final thing that happened was finally, the ISPs woke up and started blocking outgoing port 25 access. So at this point, you can't run an email server on your home system very easily anymore. You can ask some ISPs to open up port 25, but because of the blacklists that are out there, you probably still won't get email through. So you need to do something different. It's still much harder to run your own MTA, and you're going to have to find something and actually pay some money to do it. But before I do that, I'm going to run through the SMTP protocol a little bit. When you connect on port 25 to a mail transfer agent, this is what you see. You see 220, and then the name of the thing and the protocol it talks. In this case, ESMTP. You then say hello, and then the name that you are. This should be a fully qualified host name that can be looked up in DNS. And one of the first things you do as a mail transfer agent is look that up and see whether it matches onto the IP address you've got. If it doesn't, you can drop it, because it's a spammer. An awful lot of spam is still coming from dial-up boxes, Windows boxes, where the host name that grabs from the thing is just localhost.local domain. And I can drop about a quarter of the emails that come in because they come from localhost.local domain in the hello string. You'd think they'd do better than that. Anyway, your mail transfer agent says, again, who it is, and says, hello, you, and then tells you your IP address. This is good for logging, so that you can actually tell where things are going, because this also goes into the logs. You then say mail from, and then some email address. If this is an open relay, that could be anything. If it's a non-open relay, you want to constrain that to be something that you can send email back to. So you can do a check at this point to see, is email to that address deliverable? Because if I can't deliver this email that's coming up, I want to send a message back to say, I couldn't deliver this. So you can make that check too. And about another 10% of the emails I get don't have a valid mail from, and you can drop them. This is the envelope from address. It's got nothing to do with the from header that comes in the inside of the mail. It used to be that this was totally private and would not appear in the mail user agent's list of headers when you look at them. Nowadays, because of the number of spammers and phishers out there, Microsoft puts it in as a separate sender header. Most of the other mail transfer agents will add it to the received line to say what the original from address was, envelope from address was. You can then you get an OK if it's OK. Otherwise, you say receipt to, and you can have as many of these as you like within reason. Some places will block you. I mean, I think Gmail only accepts 500 or so. This is so that if you've got the same email to send to lots and lots of people, you can just do it in one transaction. Once again, if you're an open relay, you'll accept anything here. Otherwise, you'll be a little bit more things. Again, your MTA will check to see whether this is something that it knows how to deliver. If it's accepted, you'll get the accepted sign. And then you can say data. And you'll get a response that says, OK, give me your message, separated with a dot at the end. You then send in your message. Now, the only required headers here are the date and the message ID. The others are all optional. What's more, there doesn't have to be any email addresses in the to or the from. And the to and the from do not have to be aligned with either of the envelope from or to addresses. This lets you send email from no reply at trustworthy.systems to the development mailing list and not have any email addresses visible in the to address if you want it. The message ID does have a fixed format. It should include the original name of the original sender. Unfortunately, I've had email from places like banks that don't have a valid message ID, so my mail server has dropped them on the floor when I actually wanted to know that a suspicious transaction had occurred. So I ended up having to whitelist St. George Bank and a couple of others because of that. So watch out, watch your logs. Likewise, the date format is specified. It can be in any time zone, but it's got to say what time zone it is. I've noticed that if you send things via an Exchange mail server, it'll always use GMT for that. And if it's all accepted, you'll get a string back that you can then use to coordinate between you as the postmaster of your system and the postmaster of the system that you sent to work out and coordinate logs. So what we want is from our LAN, anywhere on the LAN, from envelope to anywhere to be delivered. We want anywhere in the wide area network to our domains to be delivered. But I walk around with a laptop all over the world. I want my mail from here to be delivered. And I don't want anybody else to be able to do that. So what do? Well, we want to be able to authenticate emails. And for that, we need a slight variation on the SMTP protocol. So if we look at this header when we did it, you'll notice that that bit there actually says ESMTP. It's not just SMTP. That's extended SMTP, which means we can use an extended hello here. And if we do this, we get something which looks like this. And start TLS means we can actually do a TLS start conversation and get an encrypted communications channel that will be suitable for sending some credentials over. If you do that, after the handshake, you can say hello again, and this time you'll get something which has some kind of authentication mechanism in the reply string. And then you can send a suitably encoded username password to say, this is me. And you can put the rules in the ACLs in your mail transfer agent configuration, something which says that if it's authenticated and it's from one of my domains, accept it no matter where it comes from. And that's how I can set things up so I can go from anywhere. However, what that gives you is lots and lots of attacks. And if you look at this one, they're all from different IP addresses. So fail to ban isn't going to pick them up and stop the thing in its tracks. So what you want to do here really is change things around so that you don't have port 587 and authentication available to everybody, just the people you want it to be available to. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So how do you deliver email? Well, first thing you do is you look up the domain name in DNS, and you try and find an MX record. And if there's no MX record, use the A record or the quad A record. You then connect to that on port 25 and send the email. And if it fails, they use the next down numbered MX record if there was one. And if that fails, you can delay and try again. And after some timeout, you send a message back to the sender saying, I couldn't deliver your mail. So this is my setup. I've got a VPS in Sydney, and I've got my home system, which is connected via IPv6 with a public address. And then there's the wide internet out there. My home and the VPS can talk on port 587. In practice, 587 incoming to my ISP is blocked because you're not meant to run servers at home. So I run it on port 586, but that's a minor detail. So what we need for sending email on that mail exchanger, we've got a VM that's up 24/7. We've got port 587 and 25 open, but port 587 has firewall rules that only allow connections from my IPv6 address. So no one else can talk to it. And that stops those attacks I just showed you. It's got a static IPv4 and preferably IPv6 as well. Most VPS providers will give you one IPv4 address, static IPv4 address as part of the deal. If you want more than that, you've got to pay for them. And if you want to run Spam Assassin or another spam checker, you need at least 2 gig of RAM. You can get that for around about $100 a year. That's relatively cheap. And you can use it as well for any web servers or other servers you want to run out in the world. For the mailbox store, which is running inside your home, you need just a little machine. I'm running on a virtual machine on an Odroid H2. It's a really cheap machine. You want a server that's up 24/7. This thing's low power, so it sits there. I think the disks use more power than it does because it's sitting on a big icy box disk array. With plenty of disk space to cope with your family's email habits. With a static or mostly static IP address, which can be IPv6. Hang on, what have I done here? And open ports 587 and 993 to the world. and at least 2 gig of RAM, because you're going to run Spam Assassin on stuff that goes out as well as stuff goes in. Because even though I'm tech savvy and run a Linux box at home, some of my family is not. And they might get viruses and start generating spam, so you want to detect that and get rid of it quickly. So, if you want to harden your system, you start off with the basic Debian config, which is not too bad, and install a spam scanner. I use Spam Assassin, and you set up the Spam Assassin, the spam scanner, to update its rules regularly. You also set up an email address that your family can forward email to that will extract the email and feed it into Spam Assassin's Bayesian classifier so that the spam you get is classified as spam later. To give you an idea, of every 1,000 emails I get, about 900 are dropped at SMTP conversation time because they're invalid SMTP, you know, the form address is wrong or the hello's wrong or whatever. Of the remaining 100, about 90 are dropped by the Spam Assassin and the remaining 10 get through. And even then, there's 1 or 2 emails a month that are spam. But that's the kind of environment we're in. Then you adjust your firewall. You want port 25 for SMTP, going outwards and inwards. If you're going to use an encryption, which you do want to use, then the cheapest way to get it is Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt does a challenge on port 80, which sets up a little web server. So you want port 80 open even if you're not using a web server on your system. And you want port 587 or 486 or something that's common between you and your internal mail exchanger to talk. And you want that on the external mail exchanger only to talk to your system. And as I said, I use IPv6 for that because the amount of noise on the IPv6 is much lower than IPv4 at the moment. And yeah, SSL certificates, you need to install that because Let's Encrypt won't do it for you. XIM doesn't like symlinks to a certificate. It wants the actual certificate in its configuration directory, which means you need to copy it in and then restart it each time you update the certificate. So you need to add a deployment script to do that. It's pretty easy. And I also disallow auth on port 25. On XIM, that's as simple as just adding a rule to say if it's only allow the SMTP auth on port 587, not on port 25. And that also cuts out a lot of attacks. It's all about reducing your attack surface. And then when you get email to here, to your external server, you just pipe it all back down to the internal mail server, which is not accepting email from anywhere other than your external one. So again, it's reducing the attack surface. I'm actually using port 586, not port 587, as I said. And on XIM, that's already set up for you. You just set up the hubbed host file in etc. XIM4. You also want to set up your internal smart host to talk to the external one. So you set that one up so it's got a smart host outside, which is your BBS system. You make it relay for all your local networks, and don't forget the IPv6 when you list all the networks that it's supposed to be relaying for. And you set it up to listen on port 587, which I in my firewall remap to 586 so things get in. Allow firewall 587 inwards, possibly remapped, and then use SASL-authd or similar to authenticate against your local password authentication system. I'm running LDAP at home, so SASL-authd will talk to LDAP and use the same usernames and passwords as my family uses for logging into the wiki or whatever that they're using. So you just got the same password file. Use fail to ban to stop brute force attacks. There will be fewer of them because the people who are attacking scan for MX records and attack those ones. They don't know that I'm running a SMTP server on port 586. So I don't get very many attacks on that thing except for opportunistic ones. And half the time they're trying to do HTTP attacks, which don't work. And because you've got passwords done by ordinary users, run a password cracker using the latest password lists regularly, so that if the passwords that your users are using come up in some commonly used password file out there somewhere, you know about it before the spammers and attackers try and get you. Just to mention user agents, back in the old days, you used to connect to a machine, normally by a serial port, and then run a mail client that talked to a local mailbox. We don't do that anymore. We read email on our phones and on our laptops everywhere, which means you need to have some kind of server that will serve email to you. The name of the protocol for that is IMAP. There are lots of different IMAP servers. I use Dovecot, but Courier IMAP's another really popular one. They're both prepackaged and are fairly straightforward to set up if you only want to use the bare minimum functionality. You can also use Dovecot as a local delivery agent. So you can tell, instead of having a shared mail store like I've got this, you can just tell the MTA to talk LMTP to the IMAP server, and then it will store it in its local whatever store. That will give you slightly better performance, but it's slightly harder to debug because you can't just cat the files to see what's in there. I've mentioned good passwords. SSL everywhere, but every time a mail arrives at your mail transfer agent, it will decrypt it so it can read all the headers and things and do a spam scan. So SSL will only give you hop-to-hop security. What about spoofing? This has stopped. The setup I've got will prevent mostly spammers trying to send things through your mail server, but it doesn't stop them sending from somewhere else. Well, the sender policy framework came in about 5 or 7 years ago and has become popular for preventing that. The idea here is you add a text record for all the domains that you're sending email from that says, essentially, these are the IP addresses that I'm allowing email from if it's coming from my domain. What this one here says is if it's from something which my MX record points to, then it's from me. The tilde all says this is just advisory. It's likely that nothing else is from me, but it's possible. That's because some of the users for one of my mail servers like to send stuff from Gmail and spoof the address. For incoming mail, you just set up your MTA to do that. There's a way to do that on Postfix. On XIM, you just set the macro, check SPF receipt to true. And the only problem is that this breaks email forwarding. So you need to implement, if you're going to do email forwarding, for example, for a mailing list, you need to implement a sender rewriting scheme. This is useful also in terms of fake bounce detection, because if a bounce message comes back and the from address isn't one of the ones you've looked up, that you've changed emails to, then you know it's not gone through your site. So what you do is you change the envelope from address to be something that's from you before you send it out from your mail exchanger. The SPF only checks the envelope from address. It doesn't check the real from address. So the other thing you want to do is sign all your emails. DKIM, the domain key identified mail, does this. Again, you put a special text record in that says, this is the key that I'm going to use, and that's the public key, and then you sign headers and body with a private key and put the signature in the email headers. Once again, this allows recipients to check email integrity, but it breaks mailing lists, because mailing lists like doing things like changing the subject line to indicate this is from a mailing list, or adding a footer to each mail to say this is how you unsubscribe from the mailing list. So if you're running a mailing list, like Mailman 3 or something, you need to implement something that will strip out the DKIM signature of the original and add your own one in to go out. but that breaks things too, which I shall come to. Because unsigned mails can still be spoofed, DMARC tells recipients what to do with emails that don't match. Again, you add an _dmarc.example.com text record that says what to do. The P equals is the policy. If you have drop, it means anything that doesn't pass SPF or doesn't pass DKIM, drop it, throw it away. You can also have quarantine, which says mark it with as spam, or none, which means don't do anything to it. If the envelope from doesn't match the from address internally to the mail, then SPF passes because the envelope from matches the SPF record. The DKIM passes because the from address is part of the signature, but the from address doesn't match the SPF. Then what you normally do, what you're meant to do, is drop back to the lower severity of the policy. So if it was policy equals drop, you drop back to quarantine. If the policy was quarantine, you drop back to none and let the mail through. This also breaks mailing lists and email forwarders. And you can also ask for failure reports and so on. There are lots and lots of broken implementations out of this. So if you look up Google's DMARC record, it looks like this. And you'll notice it's P equals none up there. Might be there. That means just ignore it if the SPF doesn't match and if the DKIM doesn't match. And if Google can't get email through without saying none, what hope do we have? Things you can do with your email addresses. Every time I sign up for something, I create a new email address. Then if the people I signed up with sell the email list, I can just drop the address. You can provide standard hostmaster, webmaster, postmaster addresses and abuse addresses for people to contact you. And you can share your email server with family and friends. So I, on my external VPS, also forward mail for a number of friends who are running their own email servers who are running on dynamic IP systems, so they can't actually send email. And you can set up your own email lists. Enjoy the freedom. So in summary, some spammers make our life much harder, but it's still possible to run your own email server and get email through. So take control and give it a go. Now, do we have any questions? There'll be someone with a mic running around. Oh, if you download the slides afterwards, there's a heap of references of things on how to do the explicit setup for your mail servers. There's no time in this talk to go through it, but all those blogs and things will help. So, questions? There's one over there.
Okay, so the obvious question is, what happens if you get hit by a bus and none of your family?
I have documented everything completely on my wiki internally. There's at least one more tech-savvy person in my family who can take it. Also, the people that I'm relaying email for are also tech-savvy and friends of the family, and I can give them, in an envelope at home, which is labelled in my will, the passwords and so forth that people can use to fix things. I'm more concerned about if the payment falls due for the external mail server about the time if I fall under a bus, because it might not get paid, and then all my friends and family would lose their email access until it got paid again. So that's a bigger issue. Yep.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm ashamed to say I've been running on the Gmail suite my own mail server.
Yep.
Since they offered it as a free service for the testing years back. Because I've never answered to myself questions, what do I do if my mailboxes get encrypted? How do I manage the size of the mailbox that grows gigs and gigs what is the client that you use that will both allow you download of the emails, but also leave them on the server? So IMAP that will work across the platforms. How do you handle your backups, and where do you backup? How often do you backup? Do you roll your backups? Do you do complete backups? Do you ride your server?
Is a lot of
There's
questions
like
all in
so
one.
many questions because
Yes.
we've all
Yeah, I'm
a lot of
paranoid
us-
about backups, right?
yeah.
And I run a Synergy NAS at home, which has got like 24 terabytes of storage on it. And that's where all the email servers get stored. And that is backed up incrementally to a friend whom I've also got one of. So it's an offsite backup. All right? So that I've got backups there. Email doesn't stay on the VPS. It gets put into my home server. And from there, it gets backed up. Does that answer your question enough? Well, disk is cheap, right?
Talk to me later. I know about Mailservers.
Yeah?
How do you stop all your friends and family for doing the mass mail outs? Because you always know there's going to be one person who decides to CC every single person. I've run mail servers for work, and we've got a dedicated mail stack, and we've used Cluebringer, and I think we've tied in Amavis for virus
virus
protection,
thing,
which
yeah.
is good. Yeah. Cluebringer is now defunct, so if anyone knows any replacement, some kids will know. But yeah, what do you do to stop them doing mass mail outs for whatever reasons?
It's a small, what do I do to stop mass bailouts? It's a small enough group that I can just go and talk to them, right? So far it hasn't really been that much of a problem. There's only like 5 in my family using the mail server, so it's pretty small. And then there's about another family of 5 or 6 people also using it. So it's not been that much of an issue. For the commercial, so for the ones I'm running for work, it's more of a problem. But we have been diligent in tapping people on the shoulder and telling them, don't do this. We've got mailing lists for mass mail outs, use those, and don't have miles of CC lists. Another question there?
Hello. I'm just wondering if you have any redundancy plan for when your external VPS went down unexpectedly, for example, due to a link disruption?
Okay. No, I do not, but the VPS provider does. So they have a service guarantee of no more than half an hour downtime in a year. And so far, in the last 10 years since I've started with this VPS provider, I haven't had more than about 15 minutes of downtime, except for one time when they were moving service from one location to the other, and they told me 3 months beforehand that they were going to do it, and yeah.
2 quick questions. Do you set a limit on attachment sizes? And a trickier one, do you have any way of sharing mailboxes, like between family members? Like if you have emails that you want like multiple family members to receive, rather than having to like forward them backwards and forwards?
No and no.
Down here, was that a little question or a run of questions?
Yeah?
Just wait for the microphone, please.
So people can use whatever clients they want.
Yeah, but there's a thing. What clients can handle thousands of emails? Like Zimbra was close to what Gmail can do for us. Outlook Express will not do it. What are the clients doing? What do they use?
I use I use Wanderlust on Emacs. And Thunderbird works too, and Evolution. I refuse to use anything that's not open source at home.
Who is your VPS provider?
Exigent. But I've also got Binary Lane. So, they're cheap. They're perfectly adequate for what you want, and they cost around $100 a year for the size you want. Okay, anything else? Well, I think we're out of time anyway.